Hello, and welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business.
Hello, everyone. He's Chris Kirk. Good morning, Chris.
Hi, Todd.
And I am Todd Mitten, and we're happy to have a chance to visit today about a topic in aviation that could be near and dear to many pilots' hearts, and that is near midair collisions. I don't think we're going to talk about any actual midair collisions, are we, Chris?
Well, that's why it's near.
Yes, near midair collisions. But as longtime pilots, both Chris and I have had experiences, and I'm sure some of our listeners have also had experiences with a near midair collision, and we'd be curious to know how you dealt with that, and we'll offer a little bit of thoughts on how we dealt with it. Chris, you want to get us started? Maybe a story from your days flying T-38s?
Sure. Yeah, I've got, what's interesting, Todd, is it's just one of these things that most of my stories involve being in positive control, right? In radar control.
Sure.
And seemingly think that you're safe and you're going to get a little bit of guidance from air traffic control, or maybe you're a TCAS junkie or an ADSB junkie, and you think that you're going to be safe by keeping your head inside. And so that's where it's bitten me in the past. But I think one of the most hair-raising ones and one of the quickest ones I ever had was I had a student. We were flying the T-38 up around Omaha. We were in the radar pattern at Offutt Air Force Base. I think we were with Lincoln Approach, or maybe it was Omaha Approach. I don't remember. And so it was an instrument sortie, and I had the student in the back seat, and in the T-38 we had what we called the bag, and it was a canvas hood that attached back there that you could pull up, and it would cover all of the window and all of the canopy there in the 38. So the student in that situation was in the back seat.
So you couldn't do the 1,000 peaks, 1,000 scans is worth one peak.
Yeah, that's right. 1,000, or yeah, one peak is worth 1,000 scans. I'm sure there was some of that went on. I'm going to raise that up a little bit. But so that's where they would sit during the instrument sorties, and still do. But anyway, we're up there flying along, and I had my head down. I think we're at 4,000 feet. I remember that we were going east, and of course, in the 38, in a radar pattern, we're doing 300 knots, even below 10,000 feet, because that was the safest maneuvering speed for that airplane. And I just happened to glance up, and it was, as I glanced up, I mean, there was absolutely no time to take any action. I saw a high wing airplane right in front of us, and 172, 182, one of the two, I wasn't sure which, and missed him by, I would be surprised if our tail missed the guy by more than 5 feet.
Oh my.
Maybe 6 feet. And so the student was flying, and it was just like, holy smokes. And I took the airplane from him. The procedure in that airplane when you can't see each other is you grab the stick, you shake the stick. I have the airplane so that they know that you have the airplane, and they show their hands in the mirrors to you, so
sure,
you can see that.
Positive exchange of aircraft control.
Yeah, it's very important, even if you're sitting next to each other. So I did that, and he's like, I still remember the guy's name, Brent Long. In fact, he flies for Delta. And Brent was sitting in the back, great student, and he goes, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Pull your hood back." I said, "We're done." And then I got on the radio and I made a report to Omaha Approach. But here's the interesting part. We were so close when that guy went over us, we could hear his engine.
Oh, wow.
And this is in a 300 knot T-38 with two turbines back there spinning.
Wow.
So, and Brent's like, and on top of it, Brent's like, "Is that what that shadow was?"
Oh.
I said, "Yes, it was." And I got on the horn, keyed the mic, and just chewed out approach control left and right. And the guy told me, "Well, we saw somebody there, but we didn't think, so he wasn't squawking altitude. This was probably in the mid 90s. And so didn't think enough to report the guy to us. But, all I did was just for a brief second look down. Closure rates are very high at that point. They were probably on the order of 400 to 450 knots, so it doesn't take very long for a long distance to get eaten up.
That's what I was thinking about as you were telling the story. Of course, your frustration was with Omaha Approach, and rightly so. However, and they should be thinking ahead, but you were covering a lot of ground quickly, probably more so than I don't know how many T-38s they work up at Offutt. I know it's more of a heavy base, and occasionally, obviously, they see T-38s, but maybe they didn't recognize the conflict, the distance on the radar scope. But
Right.
It is interesting you were under positive control, and as you point out, that's no guarantee.
Yeah. VMC, and of course in that airplane at the time, we didn't have any kind of TCAS or anything like that. It was all see and avoid. And, that's what I was up there being the safety pilot, essentially, watching, and it just that little quick glance. And we've all been there where, you should see an airplane that's out there and you can't see him.
Well, of course, complacency is a factor in this too. I mean, not necessarily in your story, but in a sense, many midair collisions and near midair collisions involve complacency. And I have a story from the late 1980s. I was, and I've talked about this before, I was flying traffic watch around Kansas City. We had a contract at the FBO that I worked for to fly a traffic reporter around town for a couple hours in the morning, a couple hours in the afternoon during peak traffic periods. It was very monotonous flying after a while because you covered the same ground, and if the weather was good and there wasn't much happening in terms of an accident or something to go to circle around to look at, we were just out flying. And I recall being west of Kansas City downtown, which is where you and I are sitting right now, Kansas City Downtown Airport. And I don't recall if I was talking to any ATC facility at the time. We did, if we got into any of the Class Delta airspace, of course, we had to call the tower. But I don't know that I was at that point, but I was eastbound west of Kansas City downtown, and I looked up and found myself beak to beak with a Beech Baron, actually, and took evasive action. But I mentioned complacency, and I can't really tell you how close we got. It was close. It was uncomfortably close. I startled the traffic reporter for sure. But, the routine of flying around the city for hours each day, droning, probably left me a little complacent. And fortunately, I caught a glimpse of that Baron prior to making contact with him. So that was one story that I've never forgotten that, and it does force you to be vigilant. It makes you think you should be vigilant 100% of the time.
Yeah, that's a good story. One of my GA stories, coming back from, I was still down at Vance, I think, coming back from Stillwater one night. I'm trying to remember what I was doing over in Stillwater. I remember being crystal clear, and I remember watching the shooting stars, but it was dark. There was no moon, and I think it was wintertime, so good visibility. And I decided to pick up flight following with Kansas City Center, going back to Enid. Not a very far distance. Kind of the same thing, all of a sudden I see these position lights that are really, really freaking close, right? And I made an evasive maneuver, and I got on the horn again, and again, Kansas City Center in this case, they, the responsibility is on the pilot. It's always on the pilot. So
yes,
I'm not putting this on air traffic control. You as a pilot have got to keep your wits about you, and you've got to keep your head out of the cockpit. And so on some level there, there was a big failure on my part, or on the other pilot's part, for not seeing each other, because we both had beacons on, flash strobes on, and position lights, and had umpteen miles of visibility. So again, real close situation, man. It makes you just kind of pucker up.
I recall another beak to beak story. I was a student pilot in 1980, flying with my primary flight instructor in a flying club airplane in Moline, Illinois, and Carl Gustafson was my primary instructor's name, and we took off out of Moline, went down. This was a cross-country training flight, so we flew from the Quad City Airport in Moline down to Burlington, Iowa, did a touch and go or whatever we did, took off out of Burlington, and we're headed eastbound toward, I believe, Galesburg, Illinois. And I looked up. Carl, my instructor, was bored. I recall looking out the right windows. You can picture a Cessna 150 and as a flight instructor staring out the right window, just bored. And all of a sudden, we were beak to beak with an Ozark DC-9. This was back when companies like Ozark in jet aircraft flew into smaller communities like Burlington, Iowa. And so I reacted, and he grabbed the airplane then, and we dove off to the right, but obviously well before TCAS or anything of that nature. So that's one I also recall. Today, Chris, where there's a lot more situational awareness in the cockpit to include iPads. Everyone uses ForeFlight or FlyQ or Garmin. We all use that sort of stuff. What do you think has that impacted this positively or negatively as far as obviously it's got great safety benefits, but what do you think about on this topic?
I can't help but think that in terms of people looking outside, it's negatively impacted it. You go down the highway, and I challenge you to find less than half the people you pass aren't on their phone or texting. My kids and I sometimes will have a game, and we'll see who's closest to the number of people we pass. And I know pilots are the same way. I know guys are running off taxiways because they are on their iPad or they're on their phone. And it's the same thing airborne. I think all this gee whiz stuff, it's great. It's great for situational awareness, but it's very distracting if you don't know how to approach that technology and mitigate those distractions.
Sure, yeah. And I will have to say, of course, I've ridden with you in the car on a number of times, and I'm sure your kids have plenty of people to look at as you pass, because you're not the slowest driver on the road. So I just feel like that's probably a fun game for you. No, but that's a great point that you make. Exactly. What other? That T-38 had to be. Was there other stories from that?
There were a lot of them that revolved around some of the formation flying we did. Lots of close stuff like that. But that was all planned, and sometimes it was a little closer than planned. You'd be out flying with students. We used to do a lot of solo student sorties in formation, where you'd solo a student out, and that student would be solo on your wing, or you'd be on their wing. And or you'd be with a weak student, and we all knew who those were, and we, in the morning brief, we would talk about that kind of stuff. You're going flying with so and so, you got to watch out. And when I was in flying with students in formation, my hand, while it wasn't on the stick, it was usually guarding the direction of the airplane that we were on the wing of, or that was on our wing, to keep that student from inadvertently, which had happened, going towards that airplane, so I could grab that stick real quick and go. So I had a lot of those kind of things.
You bring up formation flying, and as you know, I've done some of that with the Beach Nuts, a local Beechcraft formation group, active group, and I don't have any personal stories, fortunately, of Midairs. Well, maybe my own formation flying ability may have had an impact on some of those, but I do recall kind of on topic the worst wake turbulence event that I've gotten involved in a long time, and I had to go around out of it. I got in a formation landing, got rolled up significantly in the Bonanza up at St. Joseph, and of course immediately went around, and while not a near midair collision, it was caused from flying close to other aircraft.
Right.
So what do you think about, in the airline operations, we use TCAS. Have you ever had a resolution advisory?
Probably, yeah, I have. Haven't you?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And of course, it's not uncommon to just get a traffic alert as an aircraft might be climbing up at a high rate, and he's going to level 1,000 feet below you. And of course, then we get traffic, and we've all heard that operate airliners many times. But if you're not familiar with TCAS, a resolution advisory is something you have to react to. Chris, what you want to talk about a resolution?
Well, sure. You've got to react to it, and you deviate from whatever your ATC clearance is to the extent you need to keep yourself separated from the other airplane. Of course, what we have in a big airplane that you don't have in a GA airplane that's always on the back of our minds is we've got people in the back that are standing up, and we've got lots of moving things going on back there. And if that airplane gets maneuvered too abruptly, you could really hurt some folks in the back. And so you have to keep that in mind. Number one is the flight attendants who are standing up back there. They've got carts moving around. You've got people who disregard the seatbelt sign, and they're in the lab or any number of things. Getting bags. So there's lots of moving stuff back there. And I mean, Todd, you're on the 777, so it's 3 times the number of what I'm dealing with.
It is it's something that we train in a simulator for. Every 9 months, we do get training on how to react to resolution advisories, and that is one advantage that airliners have over general aviation airplanes. But in a general aviation airplane, just as in an airline or in a military aircraft, I'll ask the question, but I'll bet we both come up with the same answer. What's the most important traffic avoidance tool that any of us have?
Your eyes.
Your eyes, sure.
Yeah. And that's the last, thinking about it, that's the last RA that I've had. It was visual. Now, it was so hard to pick this up, but we were at cruise, I think coming out of San Diego, headed eastbound. So we were in the mid 30s somewhere, and ATC even told us about this traffic, and it was a Navy F-18. Mm-hmm. Coming beak to beak with us, and they were still quite a ways out, and they were just telling us, he was going to level off 1,000 feet below us, I think. Well, that in that instance, you're looking at closure rates of 800-900 knots or more.
Yes.
So you got a lot of space to cover there in a very short period of time, and so we didn't see him until after we got the RA, but that Navy F-18 went blowing through his altitude, and so here we are at 35,000 feet, and we're getting a climb, which you don't want to hear. You don't have a lot of performance at 35,000 feet.
No, you certainly don't.
So that was, finally we did our maneuver, and we saw the guy, pass off to our left-hand side. But for whatever reason, ATC, they knew, and they gave us heads ups. We were anticipating it, which was nice.
Well, and in all honesty, he's a Navy pilot, but he may only be a 400 or 500 hour pilot flying a high performance aircraft.
Right. Or had something else he was dealing with and distracted him as well.
Right. So it's possible. Well, it is an interesting topic and one that I think we can all learn from and take to heart. So do you have any other thoughts or any?
I just think that just be careful. As you're out there flying VFR, you're flying GA, don't take things for granted. One of the things I used to see a lot in the military was VFR pilots, general aviation pilots, blitzing through military operations areas, MOAs, active MOAs,
sure,
not talking to anybody. And so in a training environment, you gotta think twice about that. You got these airplanes that are operating out there at 500 plus knots with a kid that is learning how to fly. Largely just like you probably did when you were learning how to fly, not looking outside as much as you should,
not knowing the world's happening fast.
Man, and then we get this 172, or sometimes there's a Baron or a Mirage or you name it, and they'd go blitzing through this MOA, and then nobody could see it. You can't. It's hard to see. It's hard to pick them up.
Sure.
So I know it's a little inconvenient sometimes to go at a different altitude to avoid that, or to file IFR, or to go around it. I know sometimes it's inconvenient, but it's the safe thing to do.
I think especially in around those training bases in particular, more so than anywhere. But yeah, you're right, and it's not hard to check whether a MOA is active or not active, and so we should all, as pilots, consider that to reduce and mitigate the risk. I will also mention that brought up a point. Having flown C-130s for almost 30 years, a lot of C-130 units fly low-level training, so at 300 to 500 feet above ground level, and typically at 210 knots indicated, but you're somewhere in that range depending on whether you're trying to make up time or lose time. But you have to be, those airplanes could be hard to see. They're big, of course, but they could be hard to see against the backdrop of the terrain, or they're painted gray, and so you have a gray sky potentially. It's just another possible risk to general aviation pilots, and an awareness of where these kind of C-130 units are that actually fly low level. It's just good to know.
Yeah. So, and if you're a primarily civilian pilot, if you've ever looked at the sectional and you see those they're kind of a faded gray line, usually with an IR or a VR number. Start with an IR or VR, an instrument route or a visual route next to them. That's what Todd's talking about. Those are low-level training routes. And what you have to understand is that course line that you see depicted there on your sectional, that's the center line. Usually the route itself is what, Todd? It can be how many miles either side of that center line?
Yeah, several miles either side. But I will say even beyond that, to muddy the waters further, for example, around St. Joseph, Missouri, where the C-130 unit is that I was in, we had what we called the Pony Latin area, and Latin stood for Low Altitude Training Navigation or something like that, and LATN. And we could fly anywhere within that area. And this was a large swath of northwest Missouri and eastern Kansas that we could fly anywhere at 300 or 500 feet above ground level. And I should mention at night, today all these units do NVG, night vision training, that they are flying aircraft that are pretty darkened. There's a little bit of light on them, but just a little bit. And formations, by the way, that's another point. If you see one airplane, there's a good chance there's a second, maybe even a third. But so at night, if you're flying, check the NOTAMs. I mean, you'll hear at Sierra Tango Juliet, STJ, St. Joseph, the certain nights the control tower stays open later for NVG training. So that's a whole nother aspect of this that we, for collision avoidance, it falls on us as pilots in command to be aware of what is out there, what threats exist, including the potential for midair collisions.
Yeah. Man, this is a good discussion. I appreciate your idea on this. This is hopefully helpful. It's not, like we said at the outset of this podcast, our intent is not to talk so much about aircraft sales, even though that's our business, but just to talk about some of our experiences and things that hopefully you'll find useful and maybe a little humorous and fun to hear.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. If you would like to chat more on this subject with us, or certainly have interest in aircraft sales, you can give us a call at the office here, 816-479-2723, or check us out on the web, www.flywildblue.com. We appreciate you listening, and hope you have safe flying and a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Find us online at flywildblue.com. And don't forget to subscribe and share.